yeah, before we get into the thick of it, I'd like to talk about a couple of other things before we head into the album, because I read somewhere that part of, I don't know if this is part of moving or whatever, but part of the last year and a half, you picked up painting.
Yes.
Why,
Yeah.
why so?
I I finished in heaven and there was just nothing to do. And I couldn't leave my house. It was like this it was this brief little moment within the pandemic that I got to go to Los Angeles and hang with my best friend and make music, but then after any record there's always this strange adrenaline come down where you're not touring right away. Your record may not come out for a year, and you've just finished this piece of work that's, in my case, all consuming, writing these songs and making the record. So I just had nothing to do. And I kind of like, I just started like, I've always loved it. Actually happened, I can trace it back to like maybe no, maybe, yeah, 6 or 7 years ago. I was at the Philadelphia Art Museum, and I was a member there and I went all the time, but it was that moment where I was walking and they had a collection up, and I saw what I didn't know at the time was a Gerhard Richter painting, and I cried. I just stopped and I couldn't like handle how beautiful it was. Like, it was just this feeling, it's similar to hearing, my favorite song ever. And it just, I'm even crying now thinking about it. Jesus. It was this unstoppable time. Like it was like, excuse me, time stopped. And I was just looking at this, and that kind of like made my mind ready for art and made it ready for the visual, because I've just committed so much of my life to the sonic world. And ever since then, I've just had it in my mind that I'd like to try and paint. So finally, when In Heaven was over, I went to the art store and I think someone recognized me there, and I just was kind of like, could you teach me how to do this? Like, what do I buy? What do and this extremely helpful person working there, I believe his name was Josh, just like kind of showed me the ropes. And then I just like, I may come across as like a space case sometimes, and I do kind of live in space a lot, but I'm also was a school teacher, and I love to research, and I love the act of learning and finding ways to just like absolutely like an all-consuming interest. And so that's what happened. I read countless books, and I just spent all this time, and suddenly I realized that I had something in me that may have always been there. And I with my songs, I always say that I have a lot of big thoughts. Like, I just have these big thoughts, and what was this cathartic realization for me is I can translate those thoughts to a certain extent in my music. And they're usually pretty big anyways. But then when I started painting, I realized I could go even further in concepts of, existence. And like, I just made this one painting, and I think I'm going to call it How You're Made. And it's like this like entire mythology, I think, based around my wife, of like how this person that I love, and what divine and then like giant principles went to making my wife. And she actually said I had to, this was last week, and she said I had to stop painting because I was like, I got so into it that she like walked in on me a few times, just kind of like my face pressed up against the painting, and like listening to, like I think I was listening to what was it on repeat? I was listening to Remain in Light, of all records. Like, for some reason, Born Under Punches I had just put on, and I just was obsessed, and the painting was tied to this album. But yeah, she kind of saw me like kind of crying, pushing my face against the painting because I was so deep into it. But thank you for asking, because like it's kind of a thing I want to do now. Like, I've had a few commissions already, and
Okay.
it's very good to be getting older, I found, and to be fascinated. I think it's essential in living a long life and an enjoyable life to find, for me it was painting and other things, but for anyone, like, I remember my mom said that like my dad wanted to take guitar lessons. He'd never played guitar, and he's, in his about to be 70. And I find that so admirable when people do that. And I think it actually, I think it's going to extend my creative life a lot longer, because I think there was a moment where I realized, like, I love being Strand of Oaks, but I think I have more than that. And especially with the way the modern music, or at least my musical life is, I'll make 10 or 11 songs and then they'll be out. And then I basically just have those 11 points of creation, and that's it. And then I tour for 2 years. And it's like, it feels so nice to be able to have other extensions of, because, the 11 songs, 10 songs I put on a record sum up the culture of my mind at that point in my life, but there's still more things that I'd like to say. And
I can imagine it's much more liberating, or much more, it's more liberating in a way, because there are no expectations either from yourself or from anybody else.
Yes. And it doesn't take 5,000 emails to like figure out how the record pressing plant is delayed or something. I just can buy the paint and listen to probably Pharoah Sanders and just spend as much time as I need, in my garage. And I told my wife that it was, I went pretty deep, because I had a commission work I just finished, and I'd been in my garage for like, 15 hours a day. And I told my wife, though, I came in and we were having dinner, and I was like, my mind has traveled to the most fantastic places this week. Like, I couldn't believe the places that I went in my subconscious, and just kind of the universe. And it sounds very maybe out there, but it truly was like, I just saw things that were, and then the colors reflect that. And like orange or like pink and black can represent all of my joy somehow, and it's like, and I do this thing that's maybe inspired by Gerhard Richter, where I don't use brushes. I just have this, I call it echo brush, where I'll take a piece of plexiglass and arrange the colors, but then put it against the canvas. And I kind of know what's going to happen, but I also have no idea and it's, half the time, kind of like my guitar solos, it's a giant mistake. But then other times it's this glorious thing that happens. So it's very connected. Somehow my paintings are very Strand of Oaks. Like, they're not they're still like, oh, this kind of feels like a Strand of Oaks song, even though it's a painting.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because the kind of to use some of the jargon, then the palette that you used for this new album.
Yes.
How did you arrive at that palette? Because it is richer, and then you mentioned kind of being out there, and then there is some mention of the cosmos, and there is some etherealness to it.
I think, it actually came from a really simple place of kind of the aesthetic and overall sound of the record came with me writing songs on acoustic guitar, where and I know that sounds kind of like a weird answer, but I became so connected with the electric guitar and this volume thing that I felt like was the soundtrack to maybe a chaotic mind that I had for many years, like a very wild mind that was hard to control. And I think the electric guitar and all of that was a fitting thing, but I feel a lot more centered now. And I think I was also probably, with rock music, it's a way to like maybe hide my voice even a little bit and maybe distance myself from the listener. And I was listening to so much Lucinda Williams, and especially that song "That's Entertainment" by The Jam. Like, the way Paul Weller's acoustic sounds on that, it doesn't sound like folky acoustic. It sounds futuristic in a way, and so and REM, obviously. I think "Automatic for the People" was the genesis of the album. When I was reading that Peter Buck said that, like, "Automatic for the People" is an REM record, and they just use different tools to get there. And I think that started, and then with the overall sound of the album, which I'm actually like, is the first time, like, it's weird for me to say, I'm very proud of how we did it. I've always been hesitant, and I always find ways to not like what I make for some reason. And I'm proud of what we all did, because it doesn't, I don't know what it sounds like. I don't really have a touchstone of there's 1,000 different records that it does sound like, but where we landed feels maybe like the most unique sound I've made. And I just think it has a lot to do with, and this is a dangerous word to use, and I think you'd appreciate this. It's very dangerous to use the word jazz when you're explaining the kind of music I make, because it doesn't feel, it feels like a stretch maybe, but I believe like where jazz and Miles Davis and, like all the people that I was soaking in, it's because we didn't plan anything. Like, we didn't intend for the record to sound the way it did. It was just a spirit of improvisation where, like, Kevin Ratterman, who I produced the record with, and all of the musicians on it, we didn't have any sit-down big meetings. Like, we weren't referential at all. Like, we didn't say, like, oh, we want this to sound like so-and-so. We just kind of made the music. And it built so organically that by the end of it, like, I had no idea we were going to have a fiddle on that song Carbon, but we had this moment where, like, the song wasn't working. It really was. There was a certain period where it wasn't going to be on the record, and then we decided that the most futuristic thing we can do is actually put like a bluegrass fiddle on this instead of synthesizers, and it made the song. And that was just a decision that I probably would have never made on another record, because I would have been scared to maybe like I don't know, but I made the demo this way, it shouldn't happen. But we just were on such a connected level together that it just was like, of course we're going to put a fiddle on it, why not? And and we had moments where, like, because the main core of the record was Kevin Ratterman on drums, Cedric Lamont on bass, Carl Bramel from My Morning Jacket, and Bo Coster, and that was kind of our unit. And we kind of were all in different places making it, which was strange, and it actually fostered that jazz feeling of, like, we didn't really talk to Carl. Like, he had a month, and we basically sent him the rhythm tracks and kind of the basic foundation of the song, and we were like, Carl, have a good time. You're my favorite guitar player in the world. Like, enjoy. And he just kind of disappeared for a few weeks and just made what he wanted. And so again, I'm scared to use the word jazz, but I feel like I'm getting confident enough in my I've made 8 records, so I think I'm allowed to maybe say jazz. Like,
I get what you're saying. The fact that it's well, I'm not a big jazz connoisseur, but the fact that it's not predictable, that it's not that it can be anything, and that feels like jazz. I mean, that is, I would say, the essence of jazz, and it can come in many forms, right? But the fact that it's free and experimental and open.
Yeah. We listened to this song, I believe it's called Great Expectations. It's off of Miles Davis' record Big Fun. And it was kind of like our theme song for making the album, because it's just, I had never heard it somehow, but it's this almost a dub version of Miles Davis. And it starts with this like heady Bitches Brew era kind of funk groove. And it's 20 minutes long, and somehow by the end of the song, it's this sitar passage that is unlike any other beautiful music I've ever heard. And I'm just like, well, how did we get into the sitar zone? We just were like, and I think that really informed us of just like, I looked at Kevin a few times, like, we need to have a robot voice on Sister Saturn. He's like, what? I was like, we need a robot voice. I've always wanted to make a robot voice. So we got to do that. And it was also fun. Like, it wasn't torturous or like tormented artist, and it's heavy subjects, but in order to get through that some of the subjects, we had to have a fucking blast in order
Yeah,
to
of course.
handle songs like Jimmy and Stan. Like, we needed to laugh, because if we didn't, it would have just been overwhelming, I guess.
But I suppose this is indicative of the kind of the change that you've made in your life, right? Because I wrote all kinds of lyrics down and everything, but there's two that kind of popped into my head, and now that you're talking, which is from Sister Saturn. I'm tired of living for myself, as you mentioned. It's kind of more not just being that tortured artist and feeling woe is me attitude, but kind of looking at the world. But then also there's hurry, where it's kind of, you want to make a change, and you feel now you're now in a spot where you are willing to take risks, or you're open enough to do that jazzy kind of approach. So
Yeah.
can you take me through that transition? What, did it all come to a head, or was that kind of a very, very clear decision for you to kind of go in a different direction in terms of your health and how you were treating yourself?
I think creatively, the reason why I'm able to paint and make an album that is, I think, the most cohesive record I've ever made, it's just not drinking anymore. I just am not wasted. Like, I still do fun stuff, like, I sail the stars and have fun with that. But like, that just heaviness of drinking is gone. And the maudlin, like, forced emotional weight that's not even necessary that happened when I was drinking, where I would just say such dramatic things and have such large swinging emotions. And once that element was taken away, I think there's an inherent selfishness that comes with addiction, and it's not the person's fault. It's just because your body is driven by the need to do something beyond your control. And when you take that away and you free yourself of that, you said liberating, and I think that's such a good word, of like, it is liberating to do that. And I think what it actually turned is it allowed my mind to open up to the conceptual realm and be okay with that. And I think at least for me, when I was drinking so much, I had like a tunnel vision where I just didn't have the full scope of life. I didn't have as much joy as I wanted, or I wasn't able to handle as dark as it gets. And I think I'm tired of living for myself, is that feeling of, I always feel uncomfortable, like on Christmas when I got gifts. Like, I'm not good at getting gifts. I should be better, but I feel strangely maybe undeserving or something. Who knows? But I love the feeling of giving a gift. Like, even if it's some little trinket I bought at the airport for my wife, like, I can't wait for her to have this. And I think that's kind of what that line meant. Of you kind of, when you get rid of something that's controlling you, you're able to, like, be a better, at least for my case, better friend, better husband, better musician. I think I'm a better member of this planet.
Right.
And I think it resulted in that feeling of, like, it was actually just me celebrating that, and the decisions I made on this record, like. And I really like that we're talking about this, because there's such obvious darkness to talk about on the record, but it almost, like, the entire record was trying to not open up that door to that darkness. Like, it's there, but I wanted to turn it into pushing out the fact that I really want to celebrate this love instead of mourn this love. That's
what the line in Galacticana is from, right? I don't want to drag you down. I don't want to.
Yeah, and I think someone brought this up in a past interview, which I thought I never realized, is that my last record, Eraserland, opens with "I don't feel it anymore." That's the saddest line in the world. Like, I don't feel it anymore. Oh, I have a hard time. Like, I actually forgot a few lyrics from Eraserland, so I had to listen to it, and it will always be one of the most special moments of my life. But it was actually hard for me to hear because I heard how sad I was and lost, and it's a very emotionally. It was an emotional experience hearing those songs again, because I hadn't heard the record in years, and I was
it takes you back, right?
Yeah, and like, I don't want to be back at that place again. Like, I'm really glad that those songs were made and people could hear them, but I wanted to say, like, I don't want to drag you down. Like, we've had enough intense cathartic experiences together in 8 records in. Like, I want to make a record that there's the possibility that you're finished and you feel really nice. Like, oh, I feel good. Like, I'd like to, do something, go make out with somebody or something.
That's not too much to ask, I think.
Yeah.
After making a record, it's kind of, I want to feel good. That's
yeah.
I mean, that's, of course.
Because I mean, when you and I both probably listen to our favorite records, I'm just like, wow, I feel like I mentioned it earlier, but I Talking Heads has been probably one of the most important bands in my life since I was in middle school. But I keep saying this on Twitter and other places, but I can't avoid this almost cliche, but music is a miracle. It's like a straight up fucking miracle. Like, the fact that, like, I could have heard Remain in the Light hundreds of times, and I put it on and I was like, I feel like I've never heard music before. Like, I feel like and it was moving me to places in other worlds. And this is an album I've heard for 20 years of my life or more. And I want to approach records. And I think in Heaven, I just tried. I can never say I accomplished things. The Indiana in me will never be able to fully compliment myself. I'm unable of doing that. But I tried really hard to encompass that feeling of, like, music is a miracle. The fact that these sonic waves can travel through and connect, that, you think about something like, Purple Haze didn't exist before Jimi Hendrix made that song. It didn't exist. And it's like, it exists now. And that's a miracle. Like, so yeah, I'm on a tangent. My apologies.
That's perfect. I was just thinking in my head, you mentioned the Indiana bit. So I was thinking, do you need to grow up on the coast, near the coast, to be that full of yourself in a way?
I mean, it's very. I've said this in previous Dutch interviews, but a lot of my life is now very intertwined with, my band in Europe is Dutch.
I spoke to them a couple of weeks ago. Jimmy Diamond. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to see them on Saturday. We're making their record in Los Angeles.
Etienne, who is the manager, he lives literally 2 minutes away from here, from where I live.
Oh, I know exactly. Yeah. Well,
it's a little town.
Yeah, Hengelo.
Yeah, that's where that's why I live.
Yeah.
Now.
I love it there. And, but so that my friends, and I spend a lot of time in Holland and the Netherlands, wherever. I never know. Should I call it Holland or the Netherlands? It feels like it's got...
Technically, it's called the Netherlands, and Holland is a 2-part province. You have North Holland and South Holland. Okay,
yeah. So, but my favorite thing about... I feel like there's a lot of connections between being from Indiana and the Midwest and my Dutch friends is, like... Etienne, my tour manager, after we play a show, I always say, like, how is the show? And he'll say, do you want the answer or the Dutch answer? And I'll be like, I want the Dutch answer. And it will always be very honest, very straightforward, and thoughtful. And sometimes incredibly shocking about, he'll be like, well, actually, it wasn't good. And like, I find that so important in my life, and I think that's why I've made such, I think of my band, the Jimmy Diamond guys, like those are my best friends. I talk to them, that like we spoke almost, at least a few times a week over the pandemic, and that was kind of my beacon of light. I had friends, and and I think there's something like I and actually in my town there was a lot of Dutch names. Like we have a lot, like it was always like the tall people in my town were always like the Hugenbooms and the all those types were just like, here's all the Dutch people, they're great at basketball. But like there's a lot of commonalities, and I'm rambling again, but I find that I'm thankful that I grew up the way I did, because you're always not allowed to drift away too much into your own ego. But at the same time, I needed to grow more comfortable with being an artist, because I have such an instinct to be like, oh, it's not a big deal, my head's crazy, I just say weird things. And I almost do this self-deprecation to avoid sounding like I'm boasting. But I need to stop doing that, because even in interviews for this record, I had to stop myself, because I'd talk about a song like Horses at Night, and I would say the word weird. And I'm like, it's not weird. This is the most fucking serious thing I've ever written about. And it's Jimi Hendrix getting sent out into space and aliens smoking weed listening to it. But that's as serious as I've ever written anything. That's just as serious as JM or any song. And I'm not going to call it, I need to be careful, because when I call something weird, I feel like it diminishes the power of it. And that's,
it almost seems that then this is sorry to interrupt, but it almost seems like it's a defensive thing, where you say,
yes.
Oh, it's weird, so you can't, if you dismiss it, well, I said it was weird, something like that, right?
100%. And then you can't make fun of me for it.
Exactly.
I think that's, and that's what I get. I think that maybe embraces a lot of my personality. And if I seemingly am I'm an open person, and I pride myself in that. Like, I like to be very honest, but there still are things that I feel like I have protective mechanisms. Even if I seem like I'm oversharing, there are many things I do to maybe out of fear to protect the thing inside, which is okay, but I need to learn how to not, and I think everyone needs to do that. Like, I always tell people that are young artists, and maybe I should take my own advice. Like, if a young artist makes a song, and if you share it to somebody, if you're going to take the time to share something, you better be proud of it. You better love it, and never approach, and if someone ever tells me, like, here's this thing, it's just a demo, it's not very good. It's like, no, if you're sending me a demo, I want to know that it's the most important thing you've ever done. And I want you to love, and I know you'd think that, the artist thinks that way. And it's good to, my God, if whatever happens in your life, if you're in a position of being able to create something, it's, again, another miracle. So I need to this is the first time I've ever talked about this too. I just need to stop doing that. Like, oh, it's weird. Like, I wrote a song about Pope Killdragon. It's weird. I'm like, no, it wasn't weird. I was processing through a lot of stuff in my mind, and it's just the way I talk, and yeah. Anyways, that was a long answer.
That's a good. What helped you embrace that then? What are these days? What is helping you? Is it the support of your wife? Is it kind of the fact that people react well to the music that you make? Does that help with those type of things? To embrace yourself as an artist?
I think my wife is always that. She is. What's funny is my wife, by trade, is actually like an editor. Okay. So that's what she is. That's her greatest. She is one of the greatest. She can use words like Jimi Hendrix can do a guitar solo. She's just fantastic with, and not only words, but just like songs. And she's always there helping me. And you better believe if my wife walks across the house and if I'm writing something, she's like, oh, what's that? I'm like, okay, this is going on the record. If she likes it, this is, and so that's been a huge thing. But also, I don't think I will ever have enough time in my life to thank the My Morning Jacket members for kind of taking me to another level that I needed to go to and I didn't know I could. And making Eraserland with them and Kevin Ratterman kind of helped me grow up. And it helped me, it helped, I was around such excellence and such generosity and good people who are also extremely successful. I realized okay, I had heroes that were also friends and examples to kind of goals to reach for. And, I would sit down with Bo Coster and we would just have, he would have like deeply motivational things to say to me that a lot of times in my life, I'm the band leader. I'm the person, I'm the talkative person. I never had a lot of situations where I had an older mentor. I kind of didn't have those. And having My Morning Jacket and their input and like, I was just in Los Angeles and Jim and I were walking through this beautiful botanical garden. And I'm just like, what did I do in my life to deserve like 5 new older brothers? And I think it did help me get there and grow comfortable with like, because I always, again, apologize, and when we were, and they kind of helped me think like, no, this is serious music you're making, man. Like, get behind it. And they had to give me that. They had to like, stop making fun of this stuff, Tim. Like, be proud of this. Like, and I owe so much to that. And
it's very awesome to hear that they kind of helped you along in that.
Yeah, and they taught me like, and they also taught me you don't have to be a raving, chaotic person to make great art. They're a centered, incredibly focused group that can still reach to the deepest ethers of creation without being out of control. And that was important for me. And I think it's, I've been listening to like, I've been obsessed with Keith Jarrett because Bo turned me on to Keith Jarrett, and I have not stopped listening to it. And I realized like that, like Keith Jarrett, the way he creates, he has to make himself to be the opposite of out of control. He has to center himself and become at such peace with his soul in order to release that music. And in order to go deeper into yourself and deeper into the creative spirit, you shouldn't get more wasted. You should actually get more centered. And then you're able to communicate with that in a much more like efficient way, I guess.
Right. Well, the 2 things about what you've just mentioned. One, you mentioned your wife is an editor and that she's good with words. Is there one line or a bit of lyric on the album that she really loves?
It's kind of a general feeling, and what she did as an editor, which she deserves so much credit for, is she's always the one to kind of come in and be like, that's a little too sad on purpose. She always used the word sad on purpose, or like sad without reason. And I have such a tendency to do that, of like, I think I'm still just like a goth kid that's like, it's the darkest day. It's it's like, I just want it to be fall all the time. And, I have such a propensity towards that. And she kind of, especially in Heaven, and keep in mind, this is her sadness that I'm singing about,
Sure.
not mine. I mean, it's my sadness, but this is truly her pain
Sure.
that I'm talking about. And she was the one that still said, I don't think that line has any justification of being on this song. Like, it's just, like, woe is me. And she actually helped contain that, and I think help focus on like what really matters. What do you want to talk about? I know we've been sad, but how are we going to properly explain that? And she was, I say it on the one song, I say she's my Easter, and I that might be my favorite line I've ever written, because it's just it's not religious. It's not talking about Jesus or anything. It's like talking about when you get to be loved by such an amazing source of love, it is resurrecting. It makes me better every day. And I'm really glad. And she even wrote the bio for, like, I don't know if you received the press bio, but she writes those for me. Like,
okay.
That's her words, which she refuses to write her name on them, but because she's a pretty private person, but I was like, I want to talk about it now, at least. I'm like, yeah, I think that's part of the reason why I think the bios that she writes essentially help me understand my own records. Because she wrote on the bio, she's like, oh, I think she wrote about Hurry being the song about me giving up alcohol. And I was like, I didn't know that. And then I listened to it. I was like, wow, this song is about me giving up alcohol. Like I did. And she was able to hear that instead of me.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, based on what you said earlier, and then about being centered to make art, to be that you don't need to be off the rails in order to make good art. Part of you, like you said, you stopped drinking. You moved halfway across the country. And I read somewhere that you started. I don't know if you started, but you wake up quite early and you go on walks, and then finally. Uh, Padernalis Falls. Is that, I don't know how you pronounce
Yeah,
it.
I actually don't. I think
Uh,
Perdnell. Yeah,
well, you know what I mean. But
yeah.
so being centered, those walks, getting up early, going for walks, being in those types of surroundings. I mean, I saw the photos; they were amazing. It's. I mean, how does that kind of contribute then? How does that contribute to you feeling centered?
I felt like, as much as I was just talking about being from the Midwest and how that affects me, there's also amazing things from being there. And I, like, for instance, when I moved, when I had this insane journey to get to Texas. Like, I finished a tour and I literally drove from Brooklyn after my show home to Philly, slept an hour, and put my wife and my cats in the van and drove all the way to Texas. Like, and when I finally got there, it felt like this John Steinbeck, like primordial human response of like, I literally just laid in my yard and felt like I was connected in a way, like, and like the first thing I did when we moved there is I built a table, and I learned how to do all the construction from my grandpa and my dad, who were farmers, and I had all this knowledge that I just didn't use since I was 17. And my first instinct was such a primitive feeling of like, I need a table. We need a table in this house, and I don't want to buy one. So I built a table, and I built other things, and I think something was tapping into this like wonderful generational generational feeling of like, I feel so connected to my grandma and grandpa and my great and all these people that, like, my grandpa was born in New Mexico on top of a mountain, and like, these are some cosmic places that my family's from. And like, I think that was huge for the songwriting of like the tangible, to mix the ethereal with dirt and
Right.
like planting and like not just swimming the seas of like my emotions and struggles and traumas, but also just like, I need to go see how my crepe myrtle trees are doing, and I want to build this or like do something physical and sweat and like and all those things. I knew how to do all that. I was raised in the country. Now, I learned my jobs as a kid I was doing like heavy construction projects with my grandpa being a kid. And that's how they kind of kept all the kids out of trouble. The summer would come and my grandpa would be like, all right there, Beaver, we're going to go build another, thing. And I'd just go with my grandpa and go build. And I think this record, I'm having a slight epiphany right now. Sorry. I'm
No, no, go
getting,
ahead.
this is all kind of coming together of that feeling of like, I think that's why there's so much kind of Midwest in this record, like a myth, but a dream like Midwest. Like, I talk about barns a lot, and it's not cliche. Like, I'm getting in my Ford pickup truck. Like, I literally just grew up with a lot of barns. Like, I was always in a barn growing up for some reason or another. And like, but that the past became this dream, like most of our past do, where like Indiana became this hazy dream that it's getting harder and harder for me to remember. Like, it's harder for me to remember like my grandma Elma's voice. Like, she was from the South and she had this beautiful voice, and I don't, it's harder for me to remember it. And I think my childhood is getting to that point of like, it's becoming hazy and kind of sanded down the edges of like, oh, I got in this fight with my mom and dad, or I wanted to be dressed weird. And that stuff gets sanded down, and it becomes this like, I don't know. Yeah, this ethereal Indiana, I guess. And I think that's where Galacticana came from, of like, I'm from this part where you dissociate Americana, whatever that means, but at the same time, I always felt like it. I was in that place, but I also felt like an alien my whole life. Like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm 13 years old in this tiny town. All I'm doing is like listening to like Acid House out of Chicago and England with my friend, and like we're trying to buy synthesizers over the classical ads, the newspaper. Like so I was like in Indiana and loving Neil Young and all that stuff you're supposed to, but I was also like wanting to be in Manchester and raving my ass off, on E with, Happy Mondays in the background, so it was just this. And I think that's where Galacticana is. It's like I was raised doing, around farmers. No one in my family, I think maybe my dad went to college for a little bit, but like no one was like, there was no artist in my family. It was like a lot of like, up until like my parents' generation, it was all farmers. It was all people born on the farm, worked on the farm. And then, so I don't want to not acknowledge that that's me. Like, that's my life. Sure. But I also talk about things like in that Jimmy and Stan song, I talk about generational anxieties. And like in a hurry, I say that cerebral compulsiveness, instinctual loneliness. Like, and I think that's something that we all need to come to terms with as we get older, of like, how do we break the generational cycle of our, because maybe a great grandpa of mine might have been an alcoholic. I think there was alcoholism in my family, and it's like, how do I stop that and my mom and dad didn't drink or smoke a cigarette or do anything. So they obviously were, but these generational cycles of like problems and these hereditary things. And
patterns,
I feel like
patterns of behavior.
Yeah. And what I realize is you can break those patterns. You can be like, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not going to, and it even got so cosmic that I thought, like, do I get so nervous about my art or my level of success? I don't know what, all that stuff that we think about. I was like, is this same fear the same fear that like all of my family in the past had of like, will it rain too much? Will the freeze come? Because the worst kind of farming, my one side of my family were fruit farmers in Michigan. So like if it gets too cold too fast, your whole crop is gone. And so that means that whoever in my family was doing that was probably so stressed out every day and horrified that failure is going to happen. And I wonder sometimes, have I inherited that, and how do I again liberate myself from those patterns? But I am talking a lot. My apologies. I always have such a good time. I think this is the third time we've done this, right? Is it?
I think so. Yeah. Well, once my colleague did one interview, and I think I did the most recent one, which was around heel. Maybe, I'm not sure.
But I mean, these are always such wonderful. Like this is. I know I'm talking a lot.
No, go ahead. I don't. You make my job easy.
Yeah. It's always a good. I talk a lot all the time, but this is always a sign that like this is a place where like it's like playing in a good band. If like you're essentially like a great rhythm section, I'm like, okay, I can just be. Why I can just play a guitar solo over this the whole time.
That's very good, kind of you to say that. If we kind of round off there, because we covered a lot. This new place that you find yourself in, how do you see your creativity then going forward? Because part of what you mentioned, the kind of about those patterns and the realization that you don't have to conform to those patterns. You can break out of them. Is that in a creative sense then as well? Because you have made quite different sounding albums over the years, and now this one is already in a different direction. Can you see yourself opening up creatively even more?
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not ready to write songs right now because I'm pretty big into painting.
Sure.
But I have to admit, I've never been more excited for that moment to happen again, because I do think I've also had just incredible friend experiences recently. I've been going to Los Angeles a lot. We're kind of setting up a studio, and I feel like a teenager again. Like I just sit around and we listen to records and like just kind of have nice talks and like mind expanding music that I'm getting turned on to, and like I just am like, I'm really ready to write a record that doesn't have a source, that it's just a record, you know. And there's always going to be sources, but it feels like all of my records have some kind of mountain that lives in it that I am just looking at the whole time, of whether it's mourning something or death or tragedy. And I'm hoping that mountain isn't there. I hope it's just, I can just make a record that, you know, not to overly quote Mark Hollis too much, but I think he just talked about like migrating birds and like, you know, and I keep digging to this like geological center that feels post-emotional in a way. That's really heady, but like, because like post like passing emotion of like when you get those waves. I do this in my heart recently where I get these waves of like, it's not nostalgia, but I realize like the past is the past. Like 20 years ago is a very real number now. Like, and I was still an adult then, you know, and like these strange feelings, and like also realizing that like, wow, this is like a limited thing that I'm on right now. Like this is, you know, and there's a creeping new sense of mortality in my life, that I don't want to die. And that sounds crazy to say, but I want to be, you know, I want to have a Picasso life, you know, I want to be 90, you know, and like, I want to do that and be like, you know, I find it so interesting that, I'm still rambling. Forgive me, but
it makes sense, right? Because you feel where you've found kind of a new way of doing things, which you really enjoy, or which has opened up a lot. So you want to continue doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're, and I'm not saying you were miserable. Maybe you were. I don't know. But when you are miserable, life doesn't seem that you don't look into the future too much, because you don't want to be miserable all the time.
Yeah.
So perhaps now that you are in a very good place, then obviously you want that to continue.
Yeah, and I think it's all based around, my favorite movie of all time was Wizard of Oz. That's my favorite movie ever. And I feel like the best way to explain the life that I want is, and I feel like I'm kind of getting there, is when Dorothy opens up the door and it's color. And it's like she had this drab kind of, it's not, and what I love about it, it's not even black and white at the beginning. There's these brown sepia tone in the beginning of Wizard of Oz, and then you just see that like, oh my God, that's what green looks like, and that's what yellow looks like. And I think that's where I still feel like my record's waiting to have that door opening moment. Like I've creaked the door open a little bit, but I want that feeling of like that technicolor widescreen of that. And I've almost been like hesitant to play my guitar and kind of half start a song, but I have been like making these like very, very basic ideas that I'm very excited to pursue. But there's, you know, I think it's just embracing the conceptual. And I think that's, and again, like this is going to be the Midwest in me. I don't want to sound exclusive. Whenever I do these interviews, I don't want to see, I'm very adamant and trying to let people that are fans or listeners know that like I'm not doing anything any more special than someone just getting up and going to work. It's just my job. And when I say like embrace the conceptual, you don't have to be an artist to do that. You can be doing anything in your life. And I just encourage everyone to try that, because like if the king of chaos and self-destructive behavior, can start recognizing that, like I would like to, and it's vulnerable and maybe even cheesy, but I don't care. Like I hope people are doing that. Like I hope they're trying to seek that out in their life. And I encourage people to do that. Like, be fascinated every day. That's what I am. Like, at least I am. Like, I want to be fascinated by something, whether it's golf or Basquiat or like a horrible romantic comedy movie, or like just something to be fascinated by. And I think that's kind of it's not the secret to life, but it's a pretty good.
I think it's a very healthy attitude to have.
Yeah, and just open yourself up to fascination, because it's like, it's so much easier to be cynical or self-deprecating or make fun of something. And like, people always think that like I'm this, like all I do is think about positive things. And the fact is, like, I dislike as many records as I like.
Sure.
I just don't talk about them because it's not worth my time to discuss things I don't like. It's
Sure.
like life is limited, and I might as well talk about the things that are fascinating me than the things that, are annoying or something.
Well, that's just very, very interesting. Maybe this is a weird segue, but I read an interview by you where you were saying, what was it again? The move that you made from Philly to Texas, that it might be or it could be construed as running away from the pain, or running away. And what I found interesting then, it's kind of with what you mentioned just now. I believe consciousness in many ways is kind of a form of focused attention, which means kind of you can focus on what you want, and you can sit there in your misery, or you can focus on something happy. It doesn't mean that pain isn't there anymore, or that you have to ignore it, but it's just focused attention.
Yep. And I think that's what not to go down this road, but I think that's what people like. That could be the most general description of prayer. And I don't know what prayer is. But I do find myself, if it's called, I talked to Jim James about this. Like, I was like, I found myself praying. I don't know to what. And maybe that's what meditation is. I don't know what meditation is either, but I found this moment. I was playing some festivals a little bit ago on the East Coast, and I was like, my voice was not doing. My voice, I have trouble sometimes. Like, I lose my voice, and I don't think I ever was trained how to sing, so it's hard for me to keep up my. And I was having these moments where I was like, my voice is not working, and I really want to play these shows well. And I don't know if it was meditation or prayer, just focused attention, like you said. But I started like thinking, like, I tried to focus on love. I'm like, I tried to make my vocal cords work by kind of recognizing that I'm loved by people and I'm in a safe spot. And then what that ended up doing is I then started thinking about the audience and hoping that the audience felt loved. And then I started thinking about my family, and then my wife, and just random people in my life. And then it kind of turned into this global, like, focused attention. And I got to tell you, like, it didn't cure my voice much, but it sure made me feel a lot more connected.
Yeah, and better about the situation that you're in, right?
Yeah. And focused attention, that's the most beautiful way to put it, because it's exactly what it feels like. A laser beam if you do it right.
That's I don't know if you know this, if you heard of this guy called Alan Watts. He's a guy. Yes. Yeah, so he's a person who kind of brought Eastern philosophy and Buddhism kind of to a Western audience in the 50s and 60s, and he has a bit about focused attention, and kind of it reminded me of when you said going beyond. That's kind of what he's talking about, going beyond the self and realizing that we are in everything. It sounds very, very floaty,
but it is true. I mean, that's the problem with that kind of language. You want to deny it until you experience it, and then you're like, oh wait, we are unbelievably connected. Exactly. Unbelievably connected. I had this show. Speaking of my voice having issues, like maybe the last show I played was in Amsterdam, and everything wrong could have happened that night. My amp, I think 2 amps broke. My voice was just destroyed I think I had a cold, and then I got nervous and it seized up. And I love playing. I love playing music, and I've had so many good shows in Amsterdam, and I felt like I was letting everyone down. Like, the whole show, I felt like I'm like, why did they pay this ticket? Like, this is like this is important and I'm just not doing a good job. And I felt like that connectivity I felt, because I didn't even tell people that I was struggling. And I just felt the audience about 5 songs in just give everything back to me, and be 100% there. And it actually became the performance that actually was happening more from the audience sending love back, as opposed to me thinking I wasn't doing a good job. And that's why, that was them focusing attention back. I felt like they were like connected to me to such an extent that like they just are like, it's okay, it's a rock show, we're having a good time together. And it was, and that was maybe that was the last time I'd played in Europe, since then. And I what a beautiful thing to, if you're going to have a last show for a while because of global pandemic, what a good, it was a terrible show from my end. I just didn't do a good job. But in all actuality, it actually became such an important show because I realized how connected the audience and performers are. And not just audience performers, just people. Like, we have that power to center ourselves together. And God, that was a powerful feeling. It talk about a full swing of emotions. Like, I was as low as I could get, especially like I'm trying to play freaking guitar solo. I hear my amp breaking. Like, I hear the tubes not working as my voice is disintegrating. And I'm just like, what are we going to do here? And that night ended, and how cathartic, especially with this situation we've been in, that night ended with me just jumping off stage and just hugging. It just everybody embraced. And that was the last memory that was the last moment I really had in Europe. And I need to come back, because it was just
you're back next year, right?
Yeah, in February.
So with a bit of luck, you can have a lot more of those type of moments.
But focused attention, I am going to take that, and I think you need to know, like, from your perspective, like because I've watched some other interviews you've done on FaceCulture, and I have learned. You go so deep and so wonderful, and like real discussions. And from your end, I need to just tell you that, like, I know it's always like, oh, I'm the guy that made the record and blah blah blah. Talk about myself, but like, focused attention is like a gift that you gave me that I will be thinking about for like. That will go into a painting. That will go into songs. That's like a. So yeah,
you still I have your email, right? In the chat. So I'll send you the video, which is it's one of those after school things where somebody draws it and you hear Alan Watts' voice over it. I'll send you that. You might really enjoy it.
I would love that.
All right, you've been very kind with your time and your words. So Tim, may I thank you for your time?
Thank you, Robin. And I hope we can do this. It's unfortunate that I have to make a record in order for us to have such wonderful discussions, but I just need you to know how much I truly appreciate it. This was an enlightening and transformative discussion. So thank you.
Likewise, it's fair that this is why I like doing what I do. I barely make any money doing this, but this is why I like doing this.